At my wife's mother's birthday party, everyone got gifts but me. My wife's sister laughed. Oh, we must have misplaced yours. They expected silence. I smiled. That's okay, here's what I got myself. The room froze. When they saw it. My name is Marcus Gresham, and I'm 42 years old enough to know better, but apparently not smart enough to learn. I've been married to Mira for 7 years now, and somewhere along the way, her family decided I wasn't quite one of them. Not sure exactly when it happened, but I can pinpoint when I finally noticed it was happening. Last Saturday, to be exact. Elaine's 68th birthday party. Man, what a production that was. We're talking full-blown ballroom at the Marriott downtown, the kind of place where they charge you $50 just to look at the appetizers. Catered dinner with those fancy little plates that make you feel like you're eating at a dollhouse, champagne flowing like water, and enough flowers to make a funeral director jealous. The whole 9 yards, you know? Elaine's always been extra like that. Nothing's ever just a birthday party with her. It's gotta be an event. I showed up dressed to the nines in my best charcoal suit, the one I only break out for weddings and job interviews. Spent 20 minutes in the bathroom making sure my tie was straight and my hair wasn't doing that weird cowlick thing it does when I'm nervous. I even stopped by the florist on the way over and dropped $40 on this gorgeous bouquet of white roses, Elaine's favorite, according to Mira. I walked into that ballroom with my head held high, flowers in hand, ready to play the part of the loving son-in-law. I wasn't expecting some grand gesture or anything crazy like that. I'm not delusional. I just wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere in that room full of people who'd known each other since before I was even a thought in Myra's head. Her family's got this tight-knit thing going on. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends who might as well be blood relatives. They've got inside jokes that go back decades and stories they tell every time they get together, the kind where everyone knows the punchline before the person telling it even gets there. Me? I'm still learning everyone's names after 7 years. The gift-giving portion of the evening started around 9 o'clock, right after they wheeled out this massive 3-tier cake that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Everyone gathered around in this big circle, drinks in hand, watching Elaine hold court like the queen she thinks she is. And let me tell you, the woman knows how to milk a moment. She opened each present with this theatrical flair, gasping and clutching her chest like she was genuinely surprised, even though you could tell she probably had a pretty good idea what was in each box. First came the fancy Rolex from her son David, the golden boy who can do no wrong. Then there was this gorgeous silk scarf from her sister Margaret, the kind that costs more than most people's rent. Mira and her sister Kayla went in together on this stunning diamond necklace that caught the light every time Elaine moved her head. Even Myra's cousin Jenny, who's still in college and practically broke, managed to scrape together enough cash for a spa voucher to some high-end place in the city. I stood there clapping like a trained seal, smiling and nodding at all the right moments, watching gift after gift get handed out. The pile of wrapping paper on the floor kept growing, and so did this weird knot in my stomach. I kept waiting for my moment, you know? For someone to say, "Oh, and here's something from Marcus," or for Elaine to look over at me with that expectant smile she gives everyone else. But as the minutes ticked by and the gift pile got smaller and smaller, I started to realize something that hit me like a punch to the gut. My name wasn't going to be called. At all. Not once. Not even as an afterthought. I stood there in my expensive suit, holding my empty champagne glass, watching my wife's family celebrate without acknowledging that I even existed. It wasn't like they were being openly hostile or anything. That would have been easier to deal with, honestly. It was worse than that. It was like I was invisible, like I was just some guy who happened to be standing in their family photo, not important enough to crop out, but not significant enough to actually notice. The worst part? Mira didn't seem to notice either. She was laughing and taking pictures and hugging her mom, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband had just been completely written out of the evening script. When Kayla made some joke about how spoiled their mom was getting, Mira threw her head back and laughed like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't some oversight or innocent mistake. This was intentional. This was their way of letting me know exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy, which was apparently somewhere between the catering staff and the guy who validates parking. I wasn't family. I was just some dude who happened to be married to their daughter and sister, standing there in that ballroom, surrounded by people who were supposed to be my family too, I felt more alone than I'd felt in years. But you know what? Sometimes being invisible has its advantages. Sometimes people don't notice when you start making plans of your own. So there we were, all gathered around like some kind of Norman Rockwell painting come to life. Everyone clapping and cheering as Elaine opened what had to be the crown jewel of the evening. This absolutely stunning diamond necklace that Mira and her sister Kayla had gone on together. The thing probably cost more than my car, sparkling under those fancy ballroom lights like something you'd see in a jewelry store window on Fifth Avenue. I was clapping too, playing my part like the good little son-in-law I'd trained myself to be over the years. But inside I was still reeling from the realization that I'd been completely erased from the gift-giving portion of the evening. Elaine held up the necklace with this look of pure joy on her face, the kind of expression that makes you think maybe, just maybe, family gatherings are actually worth all the stress and awkwardness they usually bring. She was genuinely happy, and for a split second, I found myself smiling for real instead of just going through the motions. Then she started gushing about how beautiful it was and how her daughters always knew exactly what she wanted, and that familiar sting of being on the outside looking in came rushing back. "Girls, this is absolutely gorgeous," Elaine said, holding the necklace up to her throat while everyone oohed and awed like they were watching fireworks. "You two have such wonderful taste. I'm going to wear this to the charity gala next month and make all the other ladies jealous." The whole room erupted in laughter at that, because of course Elaine would turn her birthday gift into an opportunity to show off to her country club friends. That's just who she is. Everything's a competition, everything's about status, everything's about making sure everyone knows exactly where they stand in her little social hierarchy. And after 7 years of marriage, I knew exactly where I stood, which was apparently nowhere at all. That's when Kayla decided to twist the knife a little deeper. She's always been the sharper of Myra's two sisters, the one who says exactly what she's thinking without bothering to sugarcoat it or worry about anyone's feelings. Most of the time, I actually appreciate that quality in people. I'd rather know where I stand than spend my time guessing. But this time, her honesty was about to hit me like a freight train. She looked over at me with this expression that I couldn't quite read at first. Not mean, exactly, but not friendly either. Kind of like she was studying me, trying to figure out if I was going to cause any trouble or would just keep playing along with whatever game they'd all decided to play without bothering to tell me the rules. Then she tilted her head to one side, and this little smirk spread across her face. The kind of smile that lets you know someone's about to say something they think is clever, but will probably just make everyone else uncomfortable. "Oh, Marcus," she said, drawing out my name like she was talking to a child who'd just done something adorable and slightly stupid. "We must have misplaced your gift." The words hung in the air for what felt like forever, even though it was probably only a couple of seconds. But you know how time gets weird when something really awkward happens? When someone says something that everyone knows is BS, but nobody wants to call them out on it, because that would make things even more uncomfortable. That's exactly what this was. The room chuckled. Not a big laugh. Just this polite little chuckle that people do when they're not sure if something's supposed to be funny, but they don't want to be the only one not laughing. Elaine sipped her champagne like nothing had happened, like her daughter hadn't just publicly humiliated her son-in-law in front of 30 people. Mira giggled nervously and reached over to touch my arm. This gentle little pat that was supposed to make everything okay, like her touch could somehow fix 7 years of being treated like an afterthought. They all expected me to laugh it off, to shrug my shoulders and smile, and say something like, "No worries, happens to the best of us," or, "Hey, I'm just happy to be here." They wanted me to take the hit and keep the peace, because that's what I'd always done before. That's what good old reliable Marcus does. He takes whatever's dished out and asks for seconds. But standing there in that moment, surrounded by all these people who were supposed to be my family, something inside me just snapped. Not in an angry way, exactly. More like a rubber band that's been stretched too far for too long and finally reaches its breaking point. I was done being the good sport, done being the understanding guy, done pretending that being forgotten was just some innocent mistake. I didn't get mad. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm out or make a scene. Instead, I did something they never expected from quiet, predictable Marcus Gresham. I smiled, a real smile this time, not the fake one I'd been wearing all evening, and said, "That's okay. I brought something for myself." As I reached into my coat pocket, The room went dead silent. You could have heard a mouse sneeze. And that's when I knew I finally had their attention. Before I tell you what I pulled out of that coat pocket, and trust me, we'll get there, let me paint you a picture of how we ended up in this mess. Because this wasn't some overnight thing that just happened out of nowhere. This was 7 years in the making, 7 years of me trying my damnedest to fit into a family that had already decided I wasn't worth the effort. When Mira first brought me home to meet her parents, I thought I was walking into something special. You know how some families just have that warmth about them? Like you could be a complete stranger and they'd still make you feel like you belonged at their dinner table? I was expecting something like that based on all the stories Mira used to tell me about her childhood, big Sunday dinners, family game nights, everyone piling into the living room to watch movies together. Sounded like something out of a damn Hallmark card. Reality was a whole different story. From day one, I could feel them sizing me up, running some kind of invisible background check in their heads. I wasn't what they'd pictured for their precious daughter. That much was crystal clear. I didn't drive the right car. My Honda Civic looked pretty pathetic next to all the BMWs and Mercedes in their driveway. I didn't wear the right clothes. My Kohl's khakis and Target polo shirts stuck out like a sore thumb at their country club gatherings. Hell, I didn't even have the right job in their eyes. But I tried, man. God knows I tried. Every birthday, every holiday, every random family gathering they threw, I showed up with a smile on my face and a gift in my hands. I'm talking about years of this stuff. Christmas mornings at their house, where I'd spend weeks picking out the perfect presents for everyone, researching what they liked, what they needed, what might actually make them think, hey, maybe this Marcus guy isn't so bad after all. I helped with dishes when all the other men were parked in front of the TV watching football. I volunteered to run errands when someone needed something from the store. When Myra's nephew started playing soccer, I was the one offering to drive him to practice and cheering him on from the sidelines every Saturday morning. I figured if I just kept showing up, kept being helpful, kept proving that I was a decent guy who loved their daughter, they'd eventually warm up to me. What a joke that turned out to be. See, the thing about trying to earn someone's respect when they've already made up their minds about you is that it's like trying to fill up a bucket with a hole in the bottom. Doesn't matter how much water you pour in, it's all going to drain out eventually. And that's exactly what happened with me and Myra's family. Every act of kindness, every thoughtful gesture, every time I went out of my way to be the son-in-law they deserved, it all just disappeared into some black hole of indifference. The worst part wasn't even the big stuff. It was all the little things that added up over time. Like how they'd make plans for family vacations without asking if we wanted to come along, then act surprised when Mira mentioned that we'd love to join them. Oh, we just assumed you'd be too busy with work, Elaine would say, like my 40-hour-a-week IT job was somehow more demanding than anyone else's schedule. Or how they'd have these big family discussions about important decisions, where to hold the next reunion, what to do about Grandpa's old house, whether to start a family investment club, and I'd be sitting right there at the table, but they'd talk around me like I was invisible. Like my opinion didn't matter because I wasn't really family, just some guy who happened to be married to their daughter. My job was always a particular source of, let's call it confusion for them. I work in IT security, which is steady work, good work, work that actually matters in today's world. But it's not flashy. I'm not a lawyer like Kayla's husband, or a doctor like Myra's cousin Steve. I don't have business cards with fancy titles or stories about closing million-dollar deals over lunch. I sit at a computer and make sure bad guys can't steal people's information. It's honest work, but it's not the kind of work that impresses people at cocktail parties. Kayla made that crystal clear one Thanksgiving when she introduced me to some family friends as Myra's silent little accessory. Not her husband, not Marcus, her silent little accessory, like I was some kind of handbag she'd picked up at a department store. And you know what the worst part was? Mira laughed. Not a nervous laugh or an uncomfortable laugh. A real laugh, like she thought it was genuinely funny. That moment stung more than I ever admitted to anyone, including myself. Because it wasn't just Kayla being her usual sharp-tongued self. It was my wife, the woman who was supposed to have my back, supposed to defend me when her family treated me like garbage, laughing along with the joke. Like I really was just some accessory in her life, not a partner, not an equal, just something decorative that she could ignore when it was convenient. You want to know the exact moment when something inside me finally died? When I stopped trying to be the son-in-law they'd never wanted, and started becoming someone they'd never see coming. It was Christmas Eve 2 years ago, and I can tell you the exact time it happened because I was watching the clock on the mantle tick past 11:30 while everyone else was opening presents around the tree. We were at their lake house that year. This gorgeous place up in the mountains that Elaine and her late husband bought back in the 80s when lakefront property was still affordable for normal people. 3 bedrooms, huge stone fireplace, wraparound deck that looks out over the water. It's the kind of place that makes you understand why rich people are so damn smug all the time. I mean, if I woke up to that view every morning, I'd probably think I was better than everyone else too. The whole extended family was there. All the usual suspects plus a few extras. Myra's aunt and uncle drove up from Charlotte. Her cousin Jenny brought her new boyfriend, who seemed like a decent enough guy. And even old Uncle Harold made the trip despite complaining about his hip for the entire month leading up to it. The house was packed, but in a good way, you know? That cozy, chaotic feeling you get when everyone's talking at once, and there's Christmas music playing in the background, and the smell of Elaine's famous sugar cookies filling up every room. I'd spent weeks preparing for this Christmas. Not days, weeks. I'm talking about the kind of preparation that would make a military strategist proud. I had a spreadsheet on my computer with everyone's names, their interests, their sizes, links to websites where I'd found the perfect gifts. I researched. I planned. I budgeted. I wanted this to be the year they finally saw me as family. For Elaine, I found this first edition copy of some poetry book she'd mentioned loving in college. Took me 3 different antique bookstores and a trip to the city to track it down, but I found it. For Kayla, I got this high-tech fitness tracker that had just come out. She was always posting about her workouts on social media, so I figured she'd love having the latest gadget to show off. Uncle Harold got a vintage vinyl record of big band music from the 40s, something I knew he'd been looking for because I actually listened when he talked about his hobbies. I even made gifts for some of them. Yeah, you heard that right. Made them. Myra's mom had been complaining about how cold the lake house got in the evenings, so I taught myself how to knit and spent 2 months working on this gorgeous cream-colored scarf with this intricate pattern I found online. My fingers were raw from all the dropped stitches and do-overs, but I was determined to get it right. For Jenny's new boyfriend, I put together this custom tech setup for his home office since he'd mentioned working from home. Nothing too expensive, just some useful gadgets and accessories that would make his life easier. I wrapped everything myself too, not because I'm cheap, but because I wanted them to mean something. I used nice paper, real ribbon, handwritten tags. The whole 9 yards. By Christmas morning, I had this pile of presents that I was genuinely proud of. Gifts that showed I'd been paying attention, that I cared, that I wanted to be part of this family more than anything in the world. When it came time to gather around the tree that Christmas Eve, everyone had their traditional spots. Elaine in her special chair that nobody else was allowed to sit in, the kids on the floor closest to the presents, everyone else finding spots on the couches and chairs scattered around the living room. I settled in next to Mira on the love seat, watching as the gift distribution began. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop to somewhere around my ankles. Everyone had a stack of presents in front of them. I'm talking about real piles, 5, 6, 7 gifts each, all wrapped in different paper, clearly from different people. The kids had mountains of stuff, which made sense because that's what Christmas is all about when you're a kid. But even the adults had multiple gifts, evidence that everyone had been thinking about everyone else. Everyone except me. I had nothing, not even a card. Not even one of those crappy gift cards that people buy when they can't think of anything else. I sat there watching person after person open gift after gift, the wrapping paper piling up around them like colorful snow, everyone laughing and hugging and taking pictures of each other's reactions. And I just sat there empty-handed, like some kind of ghost who'd wandered into the wrong family's Christmas celebration. When I finally worked up the courage to look at Mira, to give her that questioning look that said, "What the hell is going on here?" She just shrugged and said, "Oh, Mom and Kayla must have handled the gifts this year. Sorry, babe." Like it was no big deal. Like being completely forgotten by her entire family was just one of those things that happens sometimes. That was the first time in 7 years that I didn't help clear the plates after dinner. I just sat there quietly, watching them all, and made a decision that would change everything. While Myra's family was busy laughing at me and treating me like some kind of furniture that happened to come with their daughter, I was building something they never bothered to notice. Something that would eventually make all their little jokes and dismissive comments look pretty damn foolish in hindsight. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me tell you about those late nights when everyone thought I was just watching TV or playing video games like some middle-aged loser who couldn't find anything better to do with his time. The truth is, I'd always been good with computers. Not just good, really good. It's one of those things that came naturally to me. Like some people can play piano by ear or fix any engine just by listening to it run. I could look at code and see problems that other people missed, spot security vulnerabilities that would make hackers drool, and build systems that were tighter than Fort Knox. My day job at the cybersecurity firm was solid, don't get me wrong, but it was also kind of limiting. Corporate policies, budget restrictions, endless meetings about meetings. You know how it is in the corporate world. Everything takes forever and costs twice as much as it should. But freelancing? That was a whole different ballgame. That was where I could really let loose and show what I was capable of when nobody was looking over my shoulder or telling me we couldn't afford the good stuff. It started small, really small. A buddy from work mentioned that his brother-in-law's restaurant needed help securing their online ordering system. Some punk kid had been trying to hack into their customer database, probably looking for credit card info to buy himself a new PlayStation or whatever. Nothing too sophisticated, but enough to scare the owner into wanting better protection. I figured, why not? Mira was usually busy with her own stuff in the evenings, video calling with her sisters, catching up on whatever reality TV show they were all obsessed with that week, doing those face mask things that apparently require an hour of complete silence and concentration. She never asked what I was doing hunched over my laptop at the kitchen table, and I never bothered to explain. Why would I? She'd just zone out the second I started talking about firewalls and encryption protocols anyway. That first freelance job took me about 3 hours and earned me $400. Not bad for an evening's work, right? But more than the money, it felt good to solve a real problem for real people who actually appreciated what I could do. The restaurant owner was so relieved when I showed him how secure his system was now. So grateful that someone had taken his problem seriously instead of just brushing him off or trying to sell him some overpriced software package he didn't need. Word started spreading after that. Funny how that works in the business world. Do good work for one person, and suddenly 3 more people need the same thing. The restaurant owner recommended me to his accountant, who needed help protecting his client files. The accountant told his brother, who ran a small e-commerce business selling handmade furniture and was getting killed by bots trying to crash his website during sales events. Each job led to another job, and before I knew it, I had a pretty steady stream of side work coming in. That's when I realized I needed to get serious about this. You can't just take money under the table forever, especially when you're talking about real amounts that might attract the IRS's attention. So I did what any smart businessman would do. I made it official, filed the paperwork, got the licenses, opened a business bank account. Gresham Fortress, LLC. Had a nice ring to it, don't you think? The name came to me one night when I was working on a particularly nasty security problem for this online jewelry retailer. Some group of hackers, probably overseas, based on their methods, had been probing their defenses for weeks, looking for any way in. They were persistent, I'll give them that. Every time I closed one potential vulnerability, they'd find another approach. It was like playing chess with someone who was really, really good at the game. But I was better. And when I finally locked them out for good, built a defense system so tight that they gave up and moved on to easier targets, I thought to myself, this is my fortress. This is what I'm good at. The late nights started getting later. Not because the work was hard. Hell, most of it was pretty straightforward once you knew what you were doing. But because I was getting addicted to the feeling of being needed, of being the guy people called when they were in trouble and needed someone who actually knew how to fix things. Corporate IT is all about maintaining systems that other people built. Freelance security work is about solving problems that nobody else can solve. Within 6 months, I had more work than I could handle with just evenings and weekends. Within a year, I was turning down jobs because I didn't have the time. That's when I started being selective, choosing clients who could pay premium rates for premium work. Why not? If you're the best at what you do, you might as well get paid like it. So when Kayla laughed at me during Elaine's birthday party and said those words, "We must have forgotten you," with that smug little smirk on her face like she'd just delivered the punchline to the world's funniest joke, I didn't get angry. I didn't feel that familiar burn of embarrassment that usually came with their casual cruelty. Instead, something else happened. Something that surprised even me. I felt calm. Completely, perfectly calm. Maybe it was because I'd been expecting this exact moment for months. Maybe it was because I'd finally stopped caring about their approval and started focusing on building something they couldn't touch or diminish. Or maybe it was just because I'd reached that point where you're so tired of playing someone else's game that you decide to change the rules entirely. Whatever it was, I found myself smiling. Not the fake, uncomfortable smile I usually wore at these family gatherings, but a real one. "That's okay," I said, my voice steady and quiet enough that people had to lean in a little to hear me. "I brought something for myself." The reaction was immediate. You know how a room full of people can go from chattering and laughing to dead silent in the span of about 2 seconds? That's exactly what happened. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every laugh died in someone's throat. Even the background music from the ballroom sound system seemed to get quieter, like the whole universe was holding its breath to see what would happen next. I reached into my coat pocket, the inside breast pocket where I keep important stuff, and pulled out a white envelope. Nothing fancy about it, just standard business size, clean and crisp like I'd just picked it up from the office supply store. Which, come to think of it, I probably had. I'm not the kind of guy who keeps fancy stationery around the house for special occasions. The envelope felt heavier in my hand than it should have, considering what was inside was just a few pieces of paper. But those pieces of paper represented something bigger than anyone in that room could have imagined. They represented 2 years of late nights, countless hours of research, phone calls with lawyers and real estate agents, financial planning sessions that went until midnight. They represented the moment I stopped being the guy who gets overlooked and started being the guy who does the overlooking. I placed the envelope on the table in front of Elaine, right next to her champagne glass and that gorgeous diamond necklace that Mira and Kayla had given her. The contrast was kind of perfect, actually, their shiny, expensive gift sitting next to my plain white envelope. If you didn't know better, you'd think my contribution was pretty pathetic in comparison. Shows how much appearances can fool you. Elaine looked at the envelope like it might bite her. She set down her champagne glass and picked it up with the kind of careful movements people use when they're not sure if they're holding something wonderful or something dangerous. Her fingers were shaking just a little bit. Nothing too obvious, but I noticed. After 7 years of being married into this family, I'd gotten pretty good at reading their tells. She opened the envelope slowly, like she was afraid of what she might find inside. The first thing she pulled out was a cover letter I'd printed on Gresham Fortress letterhead. Yeah, I'd splurged on the good paper for this particular occasion. Professional, clean, with my company logo at the top. Underneath that were the real documents, the ones that were about to change everything. Elaine unfolded the first page, and I watched her face as she read the header. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something that looked almost like fear. Her mouth opened slightly, like she wanted to say something but couldn't quite figure out what words to use. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. But I could tell she already knew what it was. The document was pretty clear about that. "It's the deed," I said, keeping my voice conversational, like we were talking about the weather or what time the game started on Sunday. "To this venue." That's when the room really exploded. Not with noise, with the complete absence of noise. You could have heard an ant walking across the carpet. 30-some people holding their breath all at once creates a weird kind of vacuum that makes your ears feel like they're going to pop. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds, enjoying the way everyone was staring at me like I'd just announced I was an alien from Mars. Kayla's mouth was hanging open in a way that wasn't particularly flattering. Mira looked like she'd seen a ghost, specifically, the ghost of the husband she thought she knew. Uncle Harold was squinting at me over his reading glasses like he couldn't quite bring me into focus. 6 months ago, I continued, still in that same casual tone, quietly, through my company. The whispers started then, that low buzz of people trying to process information that doesn't fit with what they thought they knew about the world. I heard fragments of conversations. "How did he?" And "I don't understand." And "Are you kidding me right now?" Elaine's hand was shaking now, not just a little tremor, but a full-on earthquake that made the papers rattle as she held them. She kept staring at the deed like it was written in some foreign language she couldn't quite decipher, even though every word on that document was crystal clear. Her face had gone from its usual perfectly applied makeup glow to something closer to the color of old newspaper. You bought the event hall?" she stammered, looking up at me with eyes that were wider than I'd ever seen them. For the first time in 7 years of knowing this woman, she was looking at me, really looking at me, instead of looking through me like I was some piece of background scenery that came with her daughter. 6 months ago, I nodded, enjoying every second of her confusion. Quietly, through my company. That's when Kayla finally found her voice, though it came out about 3 octaves higher than usual. You own this place? She gestured around the ballroom like she was trying to wave away a bad smell. You own the Riverside Events Center? Sure do, I said, letting that sink in for a moment. Been the silent owner since last spring. You've all been celebrating on my property for months now. Even got you guys a family discount on tonight's rental fee, though I don't think anyone bothered to check who was giving you that break. The whispers turned into a low roar as people started putting the pieces together. I could hear fragments of conversations all around me. Someone asking how the hell I'd afforded to buy a place like this. Someone else wondering if this was some kind of joke. Uncle Harold asking if anyone had checked my math. But the core family members, the ones who mattered, they were all just staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Mira looked like she was about to cry, or throw up, or both. Marcus, she said, her voice barely audible over the growing buzz of conversation. Why didn't you tell me? That was a fair question, actually. Why hadn't I told my wife that I'd bought a multi-million-dollar property? Why had I kept something this big a secret from the person who was supposed to be my partner in everything? The answer was complicated, but also pretty simple when you got right down to it. I did tell you, I said, looking directly at her. Remember last spring when I tried to talk to you about expanding my business? When I mentioned I was looking at some investment opportunities that could really change our financial situation? You told me you were busy planning your mom's garden party, and we'd talk about it later. I watched her face as the memory came back. Yeah, she remembered. She just hadn't been listening at the time, too caught up in whatever family drama was consuming her attention that week to pay much attention to her boring husband and his boring computer job. But that was, she started to say, then stopped herself because she realized where that sentence was going to end up. That was months ago. That was when she could have been part of this decision instead of finding out about it at her mother's birthday party along with everyone else. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I reached back into my jacket and pulled out a second envelope, this one a little thicker than the first. The room had settled into this weird kind of suspended animation where everyone was afraid to move or speak because they didn't want to miss whatever was coming next. And this, I said, placing the second envelope on the table next to the first one, is a quarterly report from my cybersecurity firm. Elaine's hands were shaking so badly now that she could barely open the envelope. Mira leaned over to help her, and I watched both their faces as they read the numbers. The color drained out of Myra's cheeks like someone had pulled a plug. Elaine made this little gasping sound that reminded me of a fish trying to breathe air. The quarterly report was pretty straightforward. 3 pages of financial data that told a very simple story. Revenue, expenses, profit margins, client retention rates. All the boring business stuff that nobody in this family had ever bothered to ask me about because they assumed there wasn't anything interesting to discuss. The bottom line was highlighted in bold at the end of the 3rd page, just so there wouldn't be any confusion about what it meant. My net revenue for the last quarter, $212,000. Not for the year. For 3 months. And that was just profit, after all expenses, taxes, and reinvestment back into the business. The gross revenue was actually quite a bit higher, but I figured the profit number would be easier for them to understand. It's the number that actually matters when you're talking about what someone's really making. You could have heard a pin drop. Hell, you could have heard a pin thinking about dropping. The entire ballroom went so quiet that I could hear the air conditioning system humming in the background, something I'd never noticed before despite being in this room for the better part of 3 hours. That's when Mira tried to speak, and I could tell she was scrambling to find the right words, the ones that might somehow undo the last 10 minutes and put us back in the reality where her husband was just some quiet IT guy who fixed computers and stayed out of the way during family gatherings. Her voice came out all shaky and desperate, like she was trying to grab onto something that was already slipping through her fingers. Marcus, she said, reaching for my arm again with that same gesture she'd used earlier, the one that was supposed to make everything okay. Why didn't you tell me about any of this? I mean, really tell me. I looked at her gently, not with anger or resentment, but with the kind of sad understanding that comes when you finally accept that someone just isn't capable of seeing you the way you need to be seen. I did tell you, Mira, multiple times. You just never listened. Every time I tried to talk about my work, about what I was building, about the opportunities one was seeing, someone changed the subject. It was true, and she knew it was true, which made it even harder for her to argue. I could see her running through the memories in her head. All those times I'd tried to share my excitement about a new client or a breakthrough I'd made with some security problem. Every single time, the conversation had somehow shifted to something else. Her sister's latest drama, her mother's health concerns, some story about a coworker that she just had to tell me right that second. Remember when I told you I was thinking about incorporating the business? I continued. You said that sounded nice, and then immediately started talking about redecorating the kitchen. When I mentioned I was looking at commercial real estate, you asked if I could pick up groceries on my way home from whatever meeting I was talking about. Myra's face was getting redder by the second, and not just from embarrassment. I could see the anger starting to build behind her eyes, that defensive fury that people get when they're confronted with their own behavior and don't like what they see. That's when Kayla decided to jump into the conversation, because of course she did. Kayla never could resist the opportunity to stir the pot when things were getting uncomfortable. She crossed her arms over her chest and gave me that look she'd perfected over the years, the one that was supposed to make me feel small and stupid. You're saying you're some kind of tech mogul now? She said, putting just enough sarcasm in her voice to let everyone know she wasn't buying any of this. What? You're like the next Steve Jobs or something. I smiled at that, because it was such a perfectly Kayla thing to say. Always ready with the put down, always looking for a way to diminish whatever was happening that she didn't understand or couldn't control. But this time, her little barb didn't have the effect she was hoping for. No, I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. I'm not saying I'm some kind of tech mogul. I'm saying I'm not invisible. That hit her right where it hurt, because she knew exactly what I was talking about. 7 years of treating me like furniture that happened to talk occasionally. 7 years of jokes and dismissive comments and casual cruelty disguised as family humor. She opened her mouth to say something back, but nothing came out. For maybe the first time in her adult life, Kayla was speechless. Elaine was still staring at the financial report like it might spontaneously combust if she looked at it wrong. Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper when she finally managed to speak. And you bought this place. Not just this one, I said, and I could practically feel the energy shift in the room as everyone realized I wasn't done dropping bombshells. 4 event spaces in total. This one, the Heritage Manor downtown, the Oakwood Country Club's event center, and that new place out by the lake, Serenity Springs. Weddings, corporate events, galas, birthday parties. They do pretty well, actually. The kind of places you all love to throw parties in. I let that sink in for a moment, watching as people started to do the math in their heads. 4 high-end event venues in a city where good venues were always booked solid months in advance. For revenue streams that didn't depend on my time or my personal involvement once they were properly managed. For investments that were appreciating in value every year while also generating steady income. Turns out, I continued, when you've been invisible for long enough, you get really good at seeing opportunities that other people miss. While you all were busy not noticing me, I was busy building something that none of you saw coming. Then I stood up, slowly and deliberately, the way you do when you want to make sure everyone understands that something important is happening. The room stayed completely silent, 30-some people holding their breath and waiting to see what I was going to do next. I don't need a gift from any of you, I said, looking around the room at faces that were finally paying attention to what I had to say. I brought my own. I paused, letting that hang in the air for a second. And I get to take it home with me. After the party ended. And let me tell you, it ended pretty abruptly after my little revelation. I walked out to the parking lot feeling lighter than I'd felt in years. Not because I'd embarrassed them or gotten some kind of petty revenge, but because I'd finally told the truth. After 7 years of swallowing my pride and pretending their treatment of me was somehow normal or acceptable, I'd finally said what needed to be said. The weight of all those unspoken words, all that accumulated resentment and disappointment, was gone. The night air felt good on my face as I made my way across the asphalt toward my car. It was one of those perfect spring evenings where the temperature is just right and there's a breeze that doesn't quite qualify as wind, but makes everything feel fresh and clean. I could hear people talking in the distance, probably family members trying to process what had just happened, but their voices seemed far away and unimportant. For the first time in longer than I could remember, their opinions didn't matter to me. I was about halfway to my Honda. Yeah, still driving the same Civic that had never impressed anyone in that family, when I heard footsteps behind me. Quick, determined footsteps that I recognized immediately. Mira was following me, probably running in those ridiculous heels she'd insisted on wearing even though she'd complained about them for the entire drive to the venue. "Marcus," she called out, her voice cutting through the quiet evening air like a knife. "Marcus, wait." I stopped walking but didn't turn around immediately. Part of me wanted to keep going, to get in my car and drive away without having this conversation. But I'd been married to this woman for 7 years, and despite everything that had happened, despite how invisible she'd made me feel, I still owed her the courtesy of hearing what she had to say. So I turned around and waited for her to catch up. She was breathing hard when she reached me, not just from the short run across the parking lot, but from the emotional upheaval of the last hour. Her carefully applied makeup was starting to show signs of wear, and there were tears in her eyes that she was trying hard not to let fall. For a moment, she looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago, vulnerable and real instead of the polished, performance-ready version of herself that she'd become around her family. "You embarrassed my mother," she said, and even though her voice was shaky, there was real anger behind those words. Not hurt, not confusion, but genuine fury that I'd dared to disrupt the carefully orchestrated evening she'd helped plan. "No," I said, keeping my voice calm and level. "I told the truth." "You blindsided us," she shot back, her voice getting louder. "You completely blindsided all of us. How could you not tell me about the venues? How could you not tell me about the money? I'm your wife, Marcus." I nodded slowly, because she was right about that part. She was my wife, and in a normal marriage between two people who actually communicated with each other, she would have known about all of this months ago. But we hadn't had a normal marriage for a long time, if we'd ever had one at all. "Just like I've been blindsided at every family event for years," I said. "Just like I was blindsided when I didn't get a single gift at Christmas. Just like I was blindsided tonight when everyone got presents except me." She opened her mouth to argue, but I could see in her expression that she knew I was right. She remembered that Christmas, and she remembered how little effort she'd made to include me in the gift exchange. She remembered all the times she'd laughed along with her family's jokes at my expense, all the times she'd chosen their approval over my dignity. "That's different," she said, but her voice had lost most of its conviction. That's just how they are. You know they don't mean anything by it." "It's not different," I said, "and they do mean something by it. They mean to let me know that I don't belong, and you've been letting them do it for 7 years. That's when Kayla decided to join our little parking lot confrontation, storming out of the venue with her arms crossed and her face set in that expression of righteous indignation that she wore whenever someone had the audacity to challenge her worldview. She marched right up to us like she was leading a charge into battle. "This is unbelievable," she said, not bothering with any kind of greeting or preamble. "You think you can just humiliate our family and then walk away like nothing happened?" I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had spent years treating me like something unpleasant she'd stepped in and felt nothing but pity. Not anger, not resentment, just sad pity for someone who was so invested in maintaining her sense of superiority that she couldn't see how small it made her. "I didn't humiliate anyone," I said. "I just stopped pretending that being treated badly was somehow my fault." "You made Mom cry," Kayla snapped. "Your mom cried because she realized that she's been wrong about me for 7 years, I replied. "That's not my problem to fix." Meanwhile, Elaine herself had appeared in the doorway of the venue, leaning against the frame like she needed the support to stay upright. She looked older than I'd ever seen her, smaller somehow, like my revelations had physically diminished her. She didn't come out to join the confrontation, but I could see her watching us from a distance, probably trying to figure out how to salvage what was left of her birthday celebration. I opened my car door, but before I got in, I turned back to face both Mira and Kayla. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the asphalt, and for a moment we all just stood there in the yellow glow. 3 people who had been connected by marriage and obligation, but had never really understood each other. I don't want apologies, I said, looking directly at Mira. It's too late for apologies. I just want acknowledgement. I showed up every year for 7 years. I brought gifts. I helped with dishes. I drove kids to soccer practice. I listened to the same stories over and over again. All I ever wanted was basic human respect. Myra's face softened then, and I could see her starting to understand the magnitude of what had been happening all this time. But understanding and changing are two very different things, and I'd learned not to confuse the two. Marcus, she started to say, reaching out toward me with one hand. But I didn't wait for her to finish. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving them standing there in the parking lot with all their assumptions and expectations scattered around them like broken glass. That night, back at my apartment. Yeah, my apartment, not our house, because I'd made some decisions about that too. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. It was good wine, by the way. Not the cheap stuff I used to buy, because I figured nobody would notice the difference anyway. This was a bottle of Cabernet that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week, and I'd bought it specifically for this moment, whenever it came. I'd been saving it for the night, when I finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. The apartment was quiet in that way that only comes when you're completely alone with your thoughts. No TV chattering in the background, no phone calls from family members who needed something, no wife asking me to help her figure out why her laptop was running slowly for the 3rd time this month. Just me, my wine, and the soft blue glow of my computer screen in the darkness. I wasn't angry. That's the thing that surprised me most about how I felt sitting there in my leather chair. The good one I'd bought myself when my business started taking off, not the hand-me-down furniture that Mira had insisted we needed to accept from her parents because it's perfectly good and why waste money. I'd expected to feel furious after everything that had happened at the party. I'd expected to be filled with rage or vindication or at least some kind of emotional intensity that matched the magnitude of what I'd just done. Instead, I felt clear, crystal clear, like someone had finally cleaned a pair of glasses I hadn't realized were dirty. For 7 years, I'd been looking at my life through this fog of other people's expectations and judgments, trying to be the man they wanted me to be instead of the man I actually was. And now, finally, the fog was gone. I opened up the browser and logged into my business accounts, all of them. Not just the ones for Gresham Fortress, but the investment accounts, the property management systems, the client portals. I wanted to see the whole picture laid out in front of me in numbers and spreadsheets and profit margins. I wanted to remind myself of exactly what I'd built while everyone else was busy not noticing me. The numbers were even better than I'd told them at the party. That quarterly report I'd shown Elaine and Mira, that was conservative. I'd been careful to only include the guaranteed revenue, the contracts that were signed and sealed and couldn't be disputed. But there were other deals in the pipeline, bigger deals with companies that had heard about my work through word of mouth and wanted to lock down my services before their competitors figured out what I could do for them. There was the tech startup that wanted me to design their entire cybersecurity infrastructure from the ground up. The government contractor who needed someone to audit their existing systems and fix the vulnerabilities that were keeping them awake at night. The healthcare network that was expanding into 3 new states and needed to make sure their patient data would be bulletproof against hackers. Each of these contracts alone would have tripled my income from just 2 years ago. My business had grown beyond what I'd ever imagined possible when I started taking those first freelance jobs at the kitchen table. I wasn't just some IT guy fixing computers anymore. I was the guy that other companies called when they needed problems solved that nobody else could solve. I was the guy with a reputation for delivering results that actually worked, not just pretty presentations that looked good in boardrooms, but fell apart the moment someone tried to hack them. And the real estate investments? Those were just the beginning. The 4 event venues I told them about were profitable, sure, but they were also appreciating in value faster than I'd projected. The market for high-end event spaces was only getting stronger as more companies moved their operations online and needed physical locations for the human connections that video calls couldn't replace. I was sitting on assets that were worth more today than they'd been 6 months ago, and that trend wasn't slowing down. But the money wasn't really the point. Even though it was nice to know I'd never have to worry about paying bills or whether I could afford to fix my car when it broke down. The real victory was simpler than that. I had built a life while they dismissed me. I had created something meaningful and valuable while they were busy treating me like background noise. My phone buzzed against the glass coffee table, the sound sharp in the quiet apartment. I glanced at the screen and saw Myra's name, along with a text message that had probably taken her 20 minutes to compose and recompose until she got the wording just right. Can we talk? 3 words that carried the weight of 7 years of marriage, 7 years of assumptions and disappointments and missed opportunities to actually see each other clearly. 3 words that represented her first real attempt to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, she'd been wrong about who I was and what I was capable of. I stared at those words for a long time, longer than it should have taken to decide how to respond. Part of me wanted to call her right then, to have the conversation we probably should have had years ago about respect and partnership and what it actually means to be married to someone. Part of me wanted to text back something kind but firm, something that would open the door to rebuilding what we'd lost without pretending that everything could just go back to the way it was before. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of being the one who always had to extend the olive branch. Tired of being the one who had to explain why basic human decency shouldn't be too much to ask for. Tired of having to prove over and over again that I deserved to be treated like a person instead of an inconvenience. So I didn't answer. Not because I was trying to punish her or make some dramatic statement, but because I finally understood something that had taken me 42 years to figure out. Sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the freedom to stop trying to belong where you're not wanted. I closed the laptop and finished my wine, sitting there in the quiet darkness of my apartment, my space, my rules, my peace. Tomorrow I had a meeting with that healthcare network about their expansion project. Next week, I was flying to Denver to consult on a security audit for a company that was about to go public. Next month, I was breaking ground on a new co-working space specifically designed for veterans transitioning into tech careers, guys like me who understood what it felt like to be underestimated and overlooked. Quiet men who had more to offer than anyone bothered to notice. Men who had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop asking for permission to be yourself. The text from Mira sat unanswered on my phone, and that was okay. Maybe someday we'd have that conversation. Maybe someday she'd understand that respect isn't something you earn by making yourself smaller, but something you claim by finally being willing to take up the space you deserve. Sometimes the best gift is finally being done trying to belong. And that night, sitting in my apartment with my successful business and my profitable investments and my plans for the future, I gave myself exactly that. Freedom, peace, and the absolute certainty that I'd never again sit at the edge of anyone's table, waiting for scraps of acknowledgement that might never come. That was the gift I gave myself. And unlike every other gift I'd ever given or received, this one was mine to keep forever.